I'm joined today by Neal Peres da Costa. Hi Neal, thank you for joining me.
Hi, Jackie.
So you've been doing a lot of research in the past with your PhD, and now you're embarking on a new project. And it's all about 19th century piano playing. So you've studied how they interpret their music, and now you're embarking on something about how to become a 19th century performer yourself. So can you tell me a little bit about your research specifically around Beethoven
Sure.
and how that's affecting the way you interpret Beethoven piano music?
Yep. So first, just to let you know that about 20 years ago, I did a PhD at the University of Leeds, and it was on the general topic of 19th century piano playing. And in that PhD, I researched the historical recordings that we have from the turn of the 20th century, which actually capture some very old 19th century pianists. One in particular, Karl Reinecker, who was a German, was born in 1824 when Beethoven was still alive.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew the likes of Mendelssohn and Liszt, and he was a really favourite German composer pianist. He played in a style that I believe Beethoven would have recognised and expected to hear in the interpretation of his music. And I believe this quite strongly because Karl Reinecker's reputation was in playing the works of Mozart and Beethoven and other classical composers, and he was hailed for doing it in this incredible style, which they said belonged to the late 18th and early 19th centuries. So my PhD focused on that, and then I had that published into a book called Off the Record, which is actually used around the world these days in institutions, and more latterly also a whole series of Brahms editions which actually look at the same evidence but applied to later 19th century composers. So in terms of Beethoven, well, I'm excited because last year, at the beginning of this year, I actually won an Australian Research Council grant for 3 years research in music performance. And what I'm trying to do is to use as a first point of departure the recordings of people like Reinecker and others who are of his age, let's say born in the 1820s, 30s and 40s, to learn how it feels to play like a 19th century pianist. So in other words, I'm spending time imitating their recordings. And over the 3 years, what I'm going to be doing is extrapolating backwards from that point and asking, well, if it feels like this to play in the late 19th century style as preserved on these recordings, how would it have been 50 years earlier, going back to the time of Chopin and Liszt, etc., and then from that point in my third year, making the step backwards to the time of Beethoven and Schubert and saying, well, if it felt like this in the middle of the century, what would it have felt like earlier? And I'm doing that through a cyclical research process which I've devised based on other work that's going on around the world, where we compare our own playing to what's in the written texts from the time, and we do a kind of reflective back and forth. And this is a very valid way of researching music performance. It's quite a new way. It's pretty sort of cutting edge in a way. Not many institutions in the world are doing it. I'm tending to do it here at the Sydney Con.
Yeah.
So today what I'd like to show you is a bit of a kind of snapshot of what I think Beethoven would have expected in playing his piano music, including concerto music, etc., but even the solo music. And I'm just about to go off to Europe and give a lecture recital on this, so it's really timely.
Fantastic.
What I'm going to do is focus on Beethoven's first piano sonata, the Opus 2 number 1 sonata, and the slow movement of it. So there are some general points from the 19th century that we know. One is that pianists often didn't play their left and right hands together. They played the right hand after the left to bring out the melody note in the right hand. And there were rules and regulations for doing this, which you can read about, but you can also hear it really well in these historical recordings. So the recordings offer us a window into that practice.
Fantastic.
That I totally and firmly believe was absolutely what Beethoven expected, composers of his era. Another practice we hear is the arpeggiation of chords, or the not playing all the notes in the chords with all the notes together. Most often pianists would roll or arpeggiate their chords to create a texture or a feeling. And again, there were rules and regulations to doing this. But one thing that sticks out for me in reading is that in the 19th century, there are many references from famous people saying, oh yes, pianists hardly ever play the notes and chords together. They always roll.
Oh.
And the opposite occurs nowadays. So
Yes.
in modern performances of Beethoven, mostly people would play the notes and the chords together. And it's a completely different effect. So
Great.
I'll just demonstrate those two things.
Fantastic.
So here's the performance as we might hear it. I'll just play the first few bars of this movement, as you might hear it in a modern performance on a modern piano. So that's the first phrase of the piece.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to add dislocations, or the splitting of the left and right hand together, and arpeggiations of the chords to create a beautiful feeling of dolce or sweetness, which is what Beethoven asks for here.
Great.
So in that example, you'll hear that practically none of the notes that look aligned in the music I'm playing in that way. I'm actually delaying all the time or spreading. So you get this kind of effect rather than
Yes.
the cleaner effect. And that's definitely one of the practices that belongs to this time and to Beethoven's performances. So Jackie, another thing that we know from accounts of Beethoven's own playing of the piano that he loved was changing the character and the mood of the music according to what he'd written. So sometimes the music was sweet, like the example I just played you, but a few bars later the character can change to something quite agitated, for example. And we know that Beethoven would actually change the character by getting faster and more dramatic in the music. So instead of having kind of just one colour, he would change his tempo, he would change sometimes the rhythms of the music.
Okay.
So I'm going to demonstrate a few bars later than what I just played to show where the character becomes a bit more agitated, that I'm going to take off, possibly in a way that people are unused to hearing, but in a way that I think brings out the character.
Wonderful.
So you can see there that I treated that section in a much more almost improvisatory fashion. So my spirit decided that it was very energetic and I just took off in a flight of fancy. Now this is quite different to the way this piece is played these days generally. It's frowned upon to change your tempo to the amount that I did.
Yes.
But in the 19th century, that wasn't the case. We know that from the recordings that we listen to of the great artists like Reinecke. They changed their tempo quite dramatically, depending on the music. And also, it's backed up by what's written in all the pedagogical works and the accounts of people playing, that they didn't necessarily play in one tempo all the time.
Yeah.
And that was part and parcel of it. So I'm, in a way, trying to bring that out by going for it and doing it even more.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, and another aspect of that is changing the rhythm. So often we've been taught to look at a page of music and to say that's how the music sounds. It's as it looks on the page. But in the 19th century and earlier, the written score was really just the starting point. It was like a roadmap. You know, it didn't have the trees and the dogs and the cats and the flowers and the colours. It was just a kind of thing to say, here are the notes, but you have to actually paint it all in, make the sound picture. So what I'm trying to do is to be a little bit freer with rhythms sometimes, in a way that, say, a jazz artist might do now, where, you know, some notes come a bit earlier, some a bit later, not quite together with the bass. And it's a way of giving the music flexibility, but also some notes are more important than others, and you want to be free in that way. So I'll try and show you by demonstrating a part where you've got a steady left hand and the right hand's doing its own thing.
Okay, great.
So it's quite a hard thing to do, but I'll see how I go.
Fantastic.
So you can hear there in that texture, my left hand had moving notes and semiquavers, and the right hand also had semiquavers, and I didn't play them very together. Now here it has how it sounds when you play them exactly together.
Okay. Quite different. It almost sounds like a study.
It does, doesn't
Yes,
it?
yeah.
It's more or less exactly what's written in the music is how I played it. I don't believe that Beethoven would ever have expected his music to be played like that. That's a very, very mid-20th century concept applied retrospectively to music of this time. So in my own work, I'm really moving away from what I grew up with.
Yeah.
The things that were valued
Yeah.
when I was a student.
Yes.
And even the things that are still being taught very strongly. You know, if you're a musician, you play the right notes, you play them in time with exactly what's on the page.
Yep.
And then if you're doing that, you're doing what the composer wanted. But of course, that's not really true.
No.
For this era, anyway.
No, it's wonderful discovering this research with the Beethoven projects we've been doing over the last 5 years with the Haydn Ensemble.
Yes.
For me, that's been one of the most exhilarating and exciting things that we've been doing and discovering is exactly this. It changes the meaning of the music.
It does, doesn't it? I mean, I've had a fantastic time doing it. Really interesting and well, working with the Haydn Ensemble, because you guys have also been so open to trying out ideas. So I suppose in our interpretations, it's not just been about me doing the piano stuff, but you string players have been adopting Beethovenian techniques, some of which are new, and you've been going along with the sort of, let's move forward here and let's pull back here and let's play with a different type of rhythm and flexibility. And so I'm very excited about this recording, because a lot of what I'm hearing is just it's a really fresh take on it.
Very fresh take. Yeah, it's been very exciting to make the recordings and also to be doing the concerts with you.
Oh, well,
so,
thank you. Well, and likewise, you know.
Yes, so I'm very excited. They have been the highlight for the Haydn Ensemble, so I'll be very sad next year not to have another Beethoven concerto.
I know.
But I'm very much looking forward to the Emperor coming up.
Yeah. We've got that. Talking of Emperor.
Yes.
I think I'll just show you one example.
Oh, how exciting. A sneak preview.
The preview.
Yeah.
So, in the Emperor, which is this, obviously, from the name we'll give it away, very heroic kind of sound. It's in E flat major. And after the opening section with the piano, there's an orchestral tutti, and then you have this beautiful dolce theme, so a sweet theme. And generally, and I've been used to hearing this when I was growing up, you hear everything played precisely together in this fashion. That's that beautiful dolce effect.
Yes.
But I firmly believe that Beethoven would have created his dolce by arpeggiating these big piano chords to sound something like this. So you can hear this harped effect, which creates a sweetness and fills out the textures. Whereas in the other way, really you're getting a nice clean attack on the chords, but the melody has less expressivity because it's always sounding with the bass rather than just a little bit after.
Absolutely.
And that was the point of this type of thing. So I'm really looking forward to working in this way with this amazing piece.
Yes,
You know,
yes,
and
so am I.
again, a fresh take, I hope, on this particular
Beethoven.
masterpiece.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. So thank you for joining me today.
Not
and
at all.
Telling us about your research and your exciting discoveries.
Yeah, well, I'm very excited about it, and thank you for having me.
Thanks.